You know, one of the things I don't really talk about enough and need to talk about more is how to make an appropriate cut on a tree. A lot of people don't realize that if you cut too close, you make what's known as a flush cut. And if you cut, a lot of people, because it's so easy with a chainsaw, you can just put it up here and make a great big cut. But that gives you a huge wound in comparison to what you really need. And the way that a tree, I hate to use the word heal because it doesn't really heal, it encapsulates the wound. Compartmentalization is the term that we talk about it. But the way that it works is if you cut beyond what's known as the branch collar or the branch bark ridge, then what you're doing is you're compromising the tree's ability to wall off that area and encapsulate that wound. So if you make it a much bigger wound, two things happen. You increase the size of the damaged area, but you also make it so that instead of it capturing a little triangle of decay in there or encapsulating that cut, the decay will now spread up and down. So a lot of times, here's a good example right here. See this limb right here? I'm going to take it off because it's rubbing. So we call this a crossover limb. Whenever you have a crossover, you got two branches that are pushing on each other. They end up damaging each other. So I'm going to make a chainsaw cut right here, right in through here, and it'd be really easy for me to take the chainsaw and make a big cut right across there. But the right spot to do it is up here. So the rule of thumb is make the smallest diameter cut that you can without it being a stub. There's somebody left an old stub. So this one right here is about right. I might have left it a little bit too long on the outside here, but it's a mistake to cut up flush. See, that's an appropriate cut. That's a small one. I retained the branch bark ridge. Sticks out just a little bit, but it's not a stub. So let me go ahead and make this cut here. Okay, I finished up that cut. And as you can see, I made the smallest diameter cut that I could without it being a big stub. It would have been really easy, but every quarter of inch of additional wood would have increased the size of this wound by 20% or so. And the easiest way to do it would be to put the chainsaw here and cut it all the way down over to here. Now I've heard the argument that you always want to cut the wound at a slant so the water will run off. And to some respect, that is true. But a lot of times people will use that argument as the reason why they make a bigger cut all the way down. They think, well, if the water runs off, then it won't decay as quickly. But the size of this wound versus the size of this wound, you could easily double the area for future decay. And as you can see, I cut that little stub over there off. The chainsaw is one of the most valuable tools we have for tree work, but it is also a tool that is often misused, especially by homeowners and inexperienced workers that don't really understand how aggressive a chainsaw can be. We're working on these two Chinese elms in a client's yard, and clearly, years ago, somebody came in here and made huge chainsaw cuts. And the thing about a chainsaw is you can make a big cut almost as fast as you can make a smaller cut, or should I say an appropriate cut. So all these cuts on this tree were cut as close as possible, which are termed as flush cuts. So the wound is much, much larger than it should be, and it leads to long-term problems. You see how they cut really close to the trunk of the tree. This one, boy, that's crazy. And the same for this other tree over here. You can see it was what they could reach from a ladder. They got up and they made they thought that by making it as close to the trunk it would leave it as attractive as possible. But there's this understanding of retaining the branch bark collar or the branch bark ridge that enables the tree to grow around the smallest cut without it being a stub. And that's probably the most important thing I can say. Here, there was a wound here from this is looks like target canker, and they cut off that old branch right there, but you can see a chainsaw cut
kind of went up a little bit too high. So while a chainsaw is a wonderful tool, it's also a tool that is misused, and people think that if they know how to run a chainsaw, they know how to make the appropriate cuts in a tree. So I'm going to repeat myself one last time. When you make a chainsaw cut or remove a big limb, try to retain the branch collar. So what I tell my guys is make the smallest cut possible without leaving a big stub. So that really it should have been left out here, cut at an angle, and it would have been more of a rounded cut, and it probably would have been about this big around. But by cutting real close, you're doubling, sometimes tripling the size of the wound. And people are saying, well, look, it's healing, but in here it's rotting away. All these cracks, moisture gets in here, so it will seal up around an area of future decay. So you have to think forward. You have to think what's going to happen when you make these cuts. A very famous arborist by the name of Dr. Alex Shigo wrote a book that better explains all the processes, and he has explained it based upon years and years of dissecting trees. This diagram shows the appropriate way to make the cut, and these final images in black and white here are from samples that he has actually dissected out in the field. The one on the left is the flush cut, and the one on the right is an appropriate cut.